morning. Welcome to everybody. I've been walking around making a joke about coming at 9 o'clock to talk about CMMC, so I appreciate you being here. I am the CEO of Max Squared Security. Before that, just a little bit of my background, because it is kind of relevant to the topic. I've spent about 20 years supporting the Department of Defense in cyber intelligence and cybersecurity. How many of you in the audience, if you don't mind raising your hand, are doing something that's DoD or DoD adjacent? So you work for the government or something government adjacent. Okay, cool. So you probably heard of different frameworks like 800-171 or 853 or the CSF or all those things. So we're going to talk a little bit about how those things relate to CMMC here. With a focus on higher education, Max Squared does a lot of work as virtual chief information security officers, managed security provider for lots of schools from K-12s all the way up to higher ed. But this is very much relevant to anyone who is doing that CMMC type work. And we'll talk about what does that actually mean. All right, so our session objectives. We're going to talk about what is CMMC, the nitty-gritty of it, confusion and misconceptions. When we start talking a lot about what is the scope, what is applicable and what is not, let's talk about what that is in a clear way to make sure that you understand what is in scope and what is not. Talk a little bit about version 1 and version 2 and why those changes matter. We did move to version 2 not too long ago, and so we want to make sure we're looking at the right things. We're going to talk about actual IT environments and infrastructure configurations. Again, a lot of our lens and a lot of our focus is on higher ed, but this is going to be very applicable across sectors. And I want you to be able to leave with something that hopefully you learned something, but leave with some actual preparation steps. We at Max Squared are very focused on making sure we don't do fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So try to give you the facts so you can make informed decisions. And I also hope to have some time at the end for questions as best I can answer them for you. So if you have been working with the government or government adjacent, as I said, you understand that the DoD has had some significant supply chain breaches over the last years. Anybody remember SolarWinds, for example? So the gift that continues to keep on giving in some cases. Threatening sensitive information and operational security. I have lots of stories that I unfortunately can't tell many of situations where we were breached when I was working for the DoD that truly would affect boots on the ground and people in the field should that information have been breached or denial of service attacks, for example. We traditionally relied on self-attestation. So contractors writ large would say, we're good, and we believed them. CMMC was developed to do a trust but verify, and in different levels, as we'll talk about. Anyone here familiar with what happened at Penn State or Georgia Tech not long ago? So kind of similar situations. Basically, they attested they were doing things. Government finds out, no, you weren't. And so what does that look like? That looks like penalties. That looks like a loss of grant money. So I would say right now, kind of outside of the government now looking in, CMMC is one of those frameworks and one of those mechanisms that I'm actually seeing action taken if the trust but verify doesn't work out. So that CMMC is a fundamental shift towards that verification and consistency rather than just relying wholly on a self-attestation. This has been going on for several years now, but it is truly, as of late last year, starting to become a real contractual requirement. We needed something more rigorous. So where does this fit in the regulatory landscape? The controls are nothing new. So CMMC is on top of existing contractual and regulatory obligations. So you see there the DFARS. If you work with the government, you've probably heard of the DFARS. So the foundational contractual security obligations for a program, for a product, different levels of CMMC for different types of information. We'll talk about that in a minute. but you work your way up to the applicability of the full 800, 171, and part of 172 frameworks. So what makes, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because I don't want to jump the gun, but let me just go ahead and jump the gun. All right, so what is this? Why is this important for universities? Increasingly, research universities, your R1s primarily, are doing basic and applied research on behalf of the federal government. So they're getting grant money and they're doing work for the federal government. CMMC is the mechanism that is going to be used from now on to validate that proper security controls are applied even in that university environment. So this is purposefully a little bit wordy because if you want the slides afterwards, I want you to have a solid framework on the slides to take away. The required certification level, this is the most important thing in the bottom paragraph there for you to understand here. The type of sensitive information that an institution handles. So your contract information even is considered worth protecting. So FCI or controlled unclassified information. And your contract will specify you have to be apply for level 1 or you're going to apply to level 2. This is very important here. The institutional size, your classification, or your sector does not determine your certification level. A small research lab handling CUI under a DoD project is exactly the same as a large defense contractor. You're required to uphold those same standards because it is all about the data. You think nothing or take nothing else away from this talk. It's all about the data. So why the reset? We had some problems with version 1. It was difficult to scale. 5 certification levels. A lot of ambiguity. So version 2 really is about trying to simplify it down to the 3 levels, trying to be more practical, and making it, again, all about the data. We're not lowering the standards. We're making it easier to apply, make it verifiable and sustainable, and create an ecosystem to validate that. So that ends up being the third-party validators that will come in, your C3PAOs, for example, who will come in and do your validation efforts. The systems that you, even this SPRS, the system that you upload your self-attestation to, we're trying to make it a smoother process for everyone involved. So what changed? I mentioned 5 certification levels reduced to 3 distinct tiers, of which we will talk in length about. POEM flexibility. So you now have that lovely plan of action and milestones with specific limitations. You can't just, as we used to do back in the good old days, put something on a POEM, set it and forget it. Just leave it there for the rest of eternity. You do actually need to have a structured path to address control gaps. We do have expanded self-assessment options for certain types of information. So there are situations where you don't have to have a third-party assessor. In a lot of cases, you're not going to have a third party come in. And then explicit recognition here of scoping as a critical determinant. We need to, if nothing else people get wrong, it's improper scoping. So basically, they took lessons learned from version 1, things that did not go well with version 1, and tried to simplify the implementation. Whoa. So what didn't change? At the end of the day, the core obligations remain. The controls are the controls are the controls, and the fundamental obligation to protect that sensitive data. The most important thing here are the evidence standards. If you have a CMMC auditor come in, you have a C3PAO come in, and we actually see this a lot with clients that we work with on a regular basis. They expect that, oh, well, I wrote a plan, so that will suffice. The evidence standard is actually not just that you have a plan, but it's that you have evidence that you use the plan, that you test the plan, you exercise the plan. I want to see actual evidence that this is not just a piece of paper or a booklet that you set on a shelf and it's gathering dust. So the purpose of version 2 kind of becoming more practical, more actionable, is absolutely the case, but it did not compromise the evidence-based standards as well. So that's really important. How many times we develop a plan and it never even gets tested, a procedure that never actually never gets walked through. So the CMMC levels overview. So level 1, foundational, that is your contract information. Again, this will be specified, the level that you are required to adhere to will be specified in that contract. 17 controls from the FAR, 52.204-21, plus the NIST 800-171. So it pulls some NIST controls. This starts with access control being your big hill to jump over there. But basic cyber hygiene practices. That should tell you something about the seriousness that the government is putting on this, that even having the contract information controlled to this rigorous standard, that they're serious about this. Level 2 advanced is where you start getting into that controlled unclassified information. So we're moving from actually talking about what we're going to do to the actual doing of that thing here. So that is your 110 controls from your NIST SP 800-171 Rev 2. Make a big note in your head about that. Put a pin in it. Revision 2. So you're very much more in the comprehensive security practices there, the full NIST framework. If anybody in the room had to implement NIST 800-171 at all within your organization, it's no joke, isn't it? It's a big deal. You had something, CJ? Yes. Did you look at my slides that are coming up? Yeah. So really here again, level 1, your foundational is that is your contract information. That's your contract itself. So that is going to be at level 1. Really, level 2 is when you start moving to that. Okay, again, this is how we're actually implementing. Let me. All right. So this is where you start seeing the actual CUI. So your engineering data, the actual doing of the project itself, research results, shared systems, even cloud and third-party platforms that are transmitting or storing data on your behalf. So that is actually where you start seeing that difference, where you move from the contract to the actual data that is supporting the project or the program that you're working on. All right, and level 3, expert. We really don't see level 3 right now. I'm not sure anyone is actually, to my knowledge, doing level 3. I don't think they've fully hammered out level 3 yet, actually. But that's going to be your subset of the additional 800-172 controls. That, I believe, the purpose of this is really going to be for having a government organization actually come in and do the assessment, not a defense contractor or a C3PAO. So that's a big thing there as well that you need to understand, is who is actually doing the assessment. So here you have the ability to self-assess. Here you have some ability to self-assess. Sometimes you're required to have a third-party assessment, and here you definitely will have a third-party assessment, probably from a government organization themselves. Again, very important to remember here, level selection is determined by the data. You don't arbitrarily choose what you want to do. You will be told. So again, data drives everything. The primary decision point here will be whether you're just handling that contract information or also processing the doing of the work that we talked about. And then contracts defining the scope. So what is FCI? Federal contract information is information that is not, pretty much is exactly what it says it is. Provided or generated for the government under a contract. This is your technical specifications, pricing information, contract performance data, and other non-public contract-related information. So not just the contract itself. Very important here. Many organizations handle FCI without recognizing it. So look at that list there of things. Proposal materials, cost breakdowns, even if they don't feel sensitive, are considered FCI and should be protected at that level 1 requirement. CUI. So a little bit more clear to organizations generally when they're processing CUI, because they are, again, they're in the thick of actually doing the work. The authoritative CUI registry, we'll have a link to this at the back also, if you don't know that, but we have an authoritative CUI registry which defines specific categories and subcategories of CUI. It's not classified information, it's explicitly not classified information, but if you are processing CUI that is specified and defined as within those categories and subcategories, you will have to implement all 110 controls and achieve level 2 certification. Again, this is where CUI tends to appear in practice. I will tell you, in my experience, where I see people struggle with scoping, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, are shared IT systems. So you're not using a separate authentication system generally for your systems that are processing CUI or FCI than you are with your just corporate systems in most cases. So how does that affect our ability to scope our CMMC domain properly? And then third-party and cloud platforms, if they are working on your behalf, they are part of your scope. So the bumper sticker here is actually very true. Identifying where CUI actually exists and getting your scoping right in many cases is actually more challenging than implementing the controls. The controls are the controls. 800.171 it's a solid framework. It's a good security framework. Got years of experience behind it at this point in time, but the scoping is actually where people truly mess up, and we'll talk about that in a second. Higher ed and research spotlight. Again, talking about how we as a company do a lot of work in this particular space, and this is some of the challenge that we face on a daily basis. A lot of research programs have been going on for years before CMMC was even a twinkle in the cyber AB's mind, and they did not identify that requirement at project initiation. So what does that mean now? Just like a defense contractor, a higher ed institution will have sub-award agreements, and they'll have partners. They'll have other research institutions that are partners. So how do we make sure that those requirements are flowing down to them as they are required to? This is, I will tell you, this is absolutely the truth here. Faculty managed systems operate with autonomy. Has anyone here ever dealt with a faculty member? Telling someone that they have to apply security to their pet rock is difficult in the best cases. Faculty members tend to want significant autonomy. We see things all the time. I have to have domain admin because I don't want to have to call and have IT installed printer on my system. Every problem you have within a traditional business, you're going to have with the higher ed environment, if not more so. Truly a hotbed also of shadow IT across the board. So when you're trying to properly scope for a large accreditation effort like this, then you find out very quickly how much shadow IT and how much autonomy that the faculty managed systems can cause you. Can cause you problems for sure. Again, and like I said previously, shared infrastructure that is serving both CUI and non-CUI purposes can really create problems when we're trying to scope. All right, so talking a little bit about the control foundations themselves. I'm going to jump ahead of something that I say later, but I just want to go ahead and get it out of the way. 800.171, not very long ago, actually moved to version 3. So now the standard framework for the current standard is 800.171 Rev 3, but not for CMMC. That is important. The control level set, they are different, slightly different controls. Level 3 transforms some controls, removes some things, collapse some things into other things. But it's important to know that CMMC did not make the move to revision 3. They stayed on revision 2. And then we talked a little previously about 172 for that level 3 certification. A subset there will be included there, enhanced security requirements for systems that truly have threat actor level requirements. The good news is that you are not alone. They actually have done a pretty good job at laying out the assessment guides, the objectives, and what an assessor will be looking for. They actually give you the cheat code to pass your examination. Highly recommend, if you haven't looked at the 800-171 assessment guides and the CMMC assessment guides, to peruse those, because they tell you exactly what evidence-based audit standards are going to be looked at whenever you have your C3PAO examination. Or even if you're doing a self-assessment, what is required for you to know? So again, very important here, CMMC does not create anything new. It just builds on that existing standard, but do remember the old standard. So a little bit more on that, kind of the move between revision 2 and revision 3. This is actually something that I see a lot. People are like, well, I want to go ahead and do revision 3 because that's the current standard. And that's fine. We do actually have a lot of organizations that are wanting to be assessed against revision 3 or wanting to implement revision 3. That's fine. But at the end of the day, you don't have to be CMMC compliant. You do, by the way, if you work in higher ed at all, you may have heard of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA. Institutions processing financial aid on behalf of the government, so that's pretty much every higher ed institution does financial aid, right? Are required to comply with GLBA. GLBA is run also out of the government, different part of the government, not the DoD. They have already said that in the future, TBD, that they are going to require systems within a higher ed space that process financial ed. They will be requiring them to comply with revision 3 of 800-171, which is going to create a big problem when you are one framework is required for one thing and another one is required for another. So I truly do hope that they sort that out. DJ? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We'll talk a little bit in a second about kind of how you might segment off, but absolutely. And a lot of that is when CJ mentions segmenting, that is creating properly scoped portions of your systems and networks that you're not including too many things under your CMMC umbrella, but that you're actually catching everything. But the big thing here, again, is especially I think this is going to be a very unique thing to higher ed, is that we're coming up very, very shortly on a situation where you're going to be required to adhere to level 2 for some things, or revision 2 for some things, and revision 3 for others. And it's going to be a problem if they don't figure out soon how to do that. Assessments, how assessments work. Mentioned previously, self-assessment. That's going to be your, you're actually self-attesting that you are following the guidelines and you're putting this into the government system, SPRS. These are not informal exercises, though. That is important bit of information there. You are, just like I talked previously about Georgia Tech, for example, you are attesting that you're doing these things, and they will come back to haunt you if you are not telling the truth. Third-party assessments here, your higher risk contracts, your level 2 and 3, are going to, in most cases, require a C3PAO. So that's going to be, it's actually a pretty rigorous process to become a C3PAO. Third-party organization that is going to come out is accredited by the Cyber AB that you see there in that last bullet. Required to meet a number of standards, training, experience, and ethics. On-site or virtual. Most of the ones I've seen have actually been on-site because they are actually looking at physical controls also, doing interviews and whatnot. One thing here I want to point out that I don't think I have in the slides, but I have seen this happen or people run up into this before. You cannot, it's actually against the rule, very explicitly against the rules. If a third-party organization comes in and helps you prepare for your CMMC assessment, they cannot then perform your CMMC assessment. So, so Max Squared, for example, we have the registered practitioners to prepare people for CMMC assessments, but we purposely don't intend to become a C3PAO. So you do end up with large companies, large defense contractors, for example, who might have a wing over here that does the preparation and a wing that does the actual assessment, but they have to be very, very clear and explicit about how they define those things and who works on these different projects. So I've seen some people try to get past that, and it's actually very explicit in the rules. Yes. If someone was coming into like it depends on the purpose of the assessment. So again, that gets back kind of to a previous slide where are they looking at revision 2 or revision 3? So if they're looking at revision 3, they're looking at a different control set. Now, again, they're extremely similar. But no, I wouldn't say necessarily, unless you explicitly ask them to look from a CMMC lens, they're just probably looking at a more basic 800-171. And we do a lot of, as an organization, we do a lot of 800-171 revision 3 assessments. But, you know, if someone asks for CMMC, which we do get, we have to turn the hat around, put revision 2 back on. And I had somebody recently the other day that wanted to be assessed against the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1, and we're like, that's very old, but they wanted 1 and not the current one, so go figure. Who knows? Poems. I joked a little bit earlier. Let me check my time. I joked a little bit earlier about what used to happen. People would put something on a poem and let it sit there. We know we need to do this. It's on the plan. We just have no budget for it. We don't actually intend to do it. We don't intend to have any personnel associated with it. CMMC is actually trying to work to solve that particular security gap. It is a security gap. Poems are allowed with limitations. They're not available for all controls. And the assessors will evaluate whether a poem is actually adequate there. They are risk-based and time-bound, so you have to have a date on those actual things. I will tell you, I had a school that got had an assessment, CMMC assessment, had a third party come in, and they came back with a poem. They gave them a certain amount of time to implement the findings that were on the poem. They did not implement those findings. And they got a notice that I think they got another set amount of time, and their grant funding would be pulled. So they're being serious. They, being the government, are being pretty serious about this. It is risk-based and time-bound. Okay, so we talked a little bit already about preparation and assessment. Your most important part, let me stomp my foot on this, is going to be scoping your environment. Scoping is harder than implementing the actual controls. Gathering evidence of compliance. This typically takes months to over a year. Absolutely, it depends. Quite frankly, if I talking earlier about plans and exercising plans, if you didn't even start with a plan, if you didn't have an incident response plan to begin with, just pulling an example plan out, you're going to be preparing for a long time. Now, more mature organizations, it truly ends up being a matter of gathering your evidence, so it might not take that long. It really is a maturity process. That's why maturity is in the name. It's a maturity process. The assessment, again, there's a self-assessment in some cases, but a formal evaluation period where a C through PAO validates that implementation. My experience in that is generally the C through PAO process, from scheduling to execution to report, can take months. Your certification is achieved upon successful assessment and is valid for 3 years. However, compliance is expected. You are actually certified to be maintaining that security posture, not to just drop everything and stop doing security once the assessors leave, which some people like to do. You must be prepared for surveillance, audits, and providing evidence that you had continued to do those things after the assessors left. Sounds like a joke, but it happens more often than not that as soon as the assessors walk away, the mice will play. Is that what that is? But you at any point in time could be required to provide evidence that you are still doing the things you said you were going to do. A whole slide. If you grab the slides after this presentation, make sure you read this one. Put it under your pillow so you sleep on it at night. Scoping is critical. Over-scoping increases burden. Do not put too much in scope. I have absolutely seen this here. Organizations scope their entire enterprise. I want everything to be CMMC compliant. Well, I want lots of things, but I can't afford those either. So here we are. If you think about it, and it's an admirable. I would love to see every organization be fully 800-171 compliant. Think about a large university with students on your infrastructure and how you're going to be, how that falls into scope, and you realize fairly quickly that is way, way, way too much in scope. However, on the other hand, underscoping increases the risk. So this is actually pretty common as well, and we'll go over some examples of this in a second of things that are often forgotten. There you go, right there. In identity management and logging, have to be in the scope, even if they're shared assets with something else. So you also run the risk, and absolutely they will get you on this. If the assessors feel like you drew your boundary too narrowly, if you forgot some of those critical systems like authentication and identity management, they can absolutely make you increase your scope or fail your assessment. Effective scoping requires, and I'm going to read this because this is so important, requires careful analysis of the data flows, how your users are accessing systems, and what systems are other systems dependent on, so dependencies. All right, so on that note, any system that stores, processes, or transmits CUI, I have even seen mobile devices end up being in scope in some cases. Users with access, so anyone who has access, that's going to be your IT admins, as well as the people maybe performing the research. If they have access to that CUI, they are in scope. Networks and communication paths, so there you go. Internal, hopefully you're not getting too much on ye old public internet, but VPN connections, encrypted channels, don't forget we also think about our cloud and third parties. But the supporting services, and I cannot stress this enough to you, this is where a lot of people struggle, is the supporting services. Backup systems, making sure your backups are in scope. They are backing up that information, they are in scope. We often see people under scope by trying to focus only on systems, the systems themselves that are processing or performing the research, and forgetting the infrastructure that enables access to those systems. So, truly critical. Segmentation. So CJ mentioned segmentation, limiting scope through architecture. So here you have just some different examples of types of segmentation, whether that ends up being logical segmentation. We're putting VLANs all over the place and trying to make sure that those things don't have logical access to each other, to the actual physical separation. I don't see as much physical separation. Not everybody has money to have their own little skiff where everything is segmented away. But some people do. So they will have their dedicated infrastructure just for that. But like I said, fairly rare. Dedicated enclaves. That's where you have those identity logging and security systems I talked about previously. You have your own just for those. Even more rare, especially in a higher ed environment. But again, don't forget the cloud boundaries as well. As things are moving increasingly to the cloud, those need to be in scope as well. Strategies apply writ large, not just to a higher ed environment, but we certainly see a lot of shared infrastructure within higher ed. There's just not the budget for dedicated enclaves. I wish there was. There is not. Common scoping mistakes. I've talked about a lot of these already. So scoping the entire enterprise, don't do it. It's going to be expensive. And this is absolutely from my experience. Careful scoping can reduce the assessment environment by roughly 80%. So even it's a lofty goal, and I appreciate everyone wanting to apply security as broadly as possible, but scope properly. Don't forget your identity systems. Remember your third parties. How many of you, I'm just curious, this is for my own research purposes, how many of you actively vet your third party vendors? I mean, like actively vet them. Yeah, well, that's a good start. That's a good start. But so we have some people actively monitoring. I have seen so many organizations fail at this point here of the overlooking third parties. They pass something off to the cloud. Microsoft's got it, guys. Microsoft's got it. They're good. And don't realize the risk still revolves. You actually still hold that risk. So your third party must meet CMMC requirements for the systems processing your CUI. So if you know you're going to be doing work that might at any point in time fall under the CMMC framework, make choices now that will save you time and money later when you're choosing a provider. And vet your providers. Come talk to me about that. That's one of my hills I will absolutely die on. And then poor documentation. Why did we scope the way we did? So I will tell you that my company, we use BitSight, absolutely. There's security scorecard is very similar. They're kind of a competitor. If you're not familiar with BitSight, it's a tool basically that does a kind of external look at a company. Everything from have they been involved in a security breach to have they, do we see them actively connecting to honeypots so it looks like they have some compromised systems on their network, as best they can do through scanning. Are they keeping up with their patches? So, we see that they've got systems that are unpatched. They've got old Chrome. They've got, old operating systems, stuff like that. They can see all of that. And basically, they pull it together to almost like a credit score. So I think it's like 250 or 300 to 900, basically score. Obviously, if you look at it from that perspective, would you work with this company? Would you give them a loan? How is their score? So it's a pretty great tool for just a passive external view. But how many organizations have you ever dealt with that they might look great if you were looking at them externally, but they're a hot mess if you look at them internally, right? So what we do is a combination of, to CJ's point, I'd love to see a SOC 2 if you got it. Higher ed has a really great, highly recommend, go check it out even if you're not working with higher ed. It's called the HECVAT, HECVAT. Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Tool, I think. Yeah. But it's actually out there, put out by EDUCAUSE, which is a large education consortium. And it's a questionnaire. It asks lots of things about internal processes, internal procedures, plans. Show me all these things. Based on the newest one, even covers cloud, on-prem, everything within one. It's a really great actual tool to do that. Highly recommend it. So to your question, we do as best we can both that external view using a tool like BitSight. Sometimes we're even doing scans on them ourselves. I love to see, my perfect vendor is the one that comes to me and says, if you need this information, here it is. We'll even go over our pen test results with you if need be. Love those. Very rare, but love them. Poor documentation, though, just to... I'm running short on time somehow. I've yacked so long. But poor documentation. If you make a decision, make sure you document why you made that decision. Don't expect that 5 years down the road, when you actually have an assessor come in, that you understand why did we scope the way we did. Make sure an assessor, having been one before many times, a packet of this is why we did what we did and here's how we implemented it is perfect. There you go, documentation. What assessors will evaluate. Your policies aligned to practice. That's very important. So that ends up being your security policies should describe what you actually do, not what you say that you ought to do. So if you aren't actually doing those things, the assessors will know and they will find cause. Accurate system security plans. Your SSP, your master document that should describe your implementation of all of the controls that you have in place that actually, again, reflects your environment and not what would be aspirational. And then evidence of consistency. And that's the money there is your, again, evidence that you do the things that you say you're supposed to do. Logs, configurations. Show me the actual technical artifacts that show you're doing what you do. This is very important. People ask me quite often, CMMC or just writ large, what vendors should I be using for X, Y, Z? CMMC does not dictate certain vendors. So anyone that tells you otherwise is wrong. No specific technologies or vendors. It's outcomes and evidence. Practical preparation steps. We talked about a lot of these already. So number one, you're going to make sure that you understand what your requirement is going to be. Level 1, level 2. I see people who want to go ahead and get ready for level 2 because they've got level 1 and they think it's coming. That's perfectly understandable, but your contract's going to dictate what you have. We love to come in as preparation for a preparation activity to review existing controls. So we come in and basically do an assessment before your assessment and build a roadmap for what you need to do. Then sometimes it takes a year to implement the things that need to be done. Resist purchasing security tools before understanding your scope and requirements. Again, there are lots of people who will be glad to sell you something to claim to make your CMMC journey easier, but large technology investments are not a requirement generally of the CMMC framework. You need to understand where your gaps are truly before you go and buy anything. I have lots of organizations that we work with that want to go and buy something rather than sit and take the time to do the assessment to understand their gap. And then, that's money thrown after expensive tools. When to act versus when to monitor. So this is important. I'll move through this fairly quickly. Active contracts right now, you need to, if you have a contract that requires CMMC, it's kind of a no-brainer. You should be, already on your journey. But if you are preparing strategically, understand what type of work you're going to be doing. Again, if you're going to be doing basic or applied research, it's not too aspirational to go ahead and let's just say we want to go ahead and start pursuing CMMC level 2 readiness, but it should be proportional to actual contractual exposure. All right, key takeaways. Got 1 minute left. All right, cool. So the big money things that I want you to really remember here: scope, data and scope matter most. That's the most important thing. Take nothing else. Data and scope matter most. CMMC, building on a framework that's already there. Great framework of the 800-171 guidelines. Make sure that you are going with version 2. If you are working on CMMC, version 3 is the current standard. But preparation beats overreaction. So, like we talked about in the last slide, if you have a situation where you think you're going to be doing this work, take the time now to carefully and thoughtfully get assessed, understand where your gaps are, instead of just spending money on something that will be shiny and beep at you. Questions? Glad to stick around and talk to anybody afterwards. Please let me know if you want to follow up, even by email. That's fine also. Official resources. I talked about this earlier. Some things, if you grab the slides, these are official resources. The Cyber Accreditation Body, the authoritative group that administers the CMMC, Rev 2, and you also find Rev 3 on the NIST website, of course. This is a really interesting one. Bookmark the CUI registry. Understand what is actually CUI and what's not. And there's my contact information. Contact me anytime about CMMC, or if you just want to talk. I like Doctor Who. I'm really into rugby right now, so we can talk about that also. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate you.